Hello, everyone. It looks like we have started. Um, Let me give Bruce to talk. All right. So, welcome to this February Minnesota Turkey Growers Association webinar. Today, we have Bruce Kleven talking about the legislative priorities that we will be going to St. Paul with next week at Poultry Day at the Capitol. If you haven't already registered for Poultry Day at the Capitol, please do so as soon as you can. That really helps us generate the list of meetings we're going to have set up. We already are at about 20 meetings set up with individual representatives. Plus, we have several agency representatives coming in and talking to the group as a whole. This meeting is recorded and will be available on the website if you'd like to review it. And if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the question and answer panel. And I will now turn it over to Bruce and let him present.
Okay, thank you, Peter. First of all, let's check here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, I don't seem to have a camera capability here, so I don't
Let
know what happened
me.
with that.
Permission to talk, chat, hide. No, because you came in. We're gonna have to just work with it, I think, because you came in
Okay.
as a guest and not a presenter, and I can't turn you into a presenter.
Okay. I did go out and click your second link you sent to me. So problem for me is I don't have a teenager here to fix this, so we'll probably just have to go without camera. Okay. So I'll launch in, Peter, and Ashley wanted me to just kind of prepare to get the lay of the land here. This legislative session has started off goofy. If you've seen it in the paper, we had the first 4 weeks where the House wasn't functioning. The Senate has done quite well this year, and so the mood here is fine now. But for a while, it was very contentious. The session generally is an overall matter, just by way of background, is going to run for about 5 months this year. That's the schedule. It starts the second Tuesday in January, and the members have to be out of here on the third Monday in May. That's the constitutional adjournment date. If they don't make that date, the governor has to call them back in the special session. And we probably expect that to happen this year, given the late start and the fact that the House members aren't getting along very well. The chief piece of work this year for this legislature is to set a 2-year budget. They do this every spring following an election. So we had an election in 2024. They show up in January. They must set a budget, and they must set it by June 30th of this summer. That'll be the work here. So a lot of the issues that we have this year are going to be in the context of financial. Other years, those of you that have been here in past years have seen policy issues. Sometimes we have 4 or 5 policy issues, but this year we're going to focus on funding. And so that's the setup for this session. If they don't get done by June 30th, and that is a possibility this year, parts of the government will start shutting down on July 1st. And so the pressure date really is June 30th, even though it's technically May 19th. So that's the work. Now, for context this year in the budget, we are facing a little bit of a tighter ship than what we had 2 years ago. So to go back to the budget overall, in 2021, the legislature passed a general fund budget that totaled $52 billion, 52. 2 years later, in 2023, there was all DFL control in this building. Governor, House, and Senate were all controlled by the Democrats. And there was a $17 billion surplus, and they basically spent it all on various things. The budget 2 years ago had jumped from 52 billion up to 72, so 38% increase in just 2 years. I tell you that because now the legislature is facing a deficit 2 years from now. And part of that has to do with the spending that was done in 2023. The tails on some of those projects and those things that they did in 23 are going to show up in 27 and 29 in what are called the out years. That's important because when you folks come to town next week and we have some financial asks here, we're doing that in the context of a fiscally tight legislature that we didn't have before. In other words, they had the party in 2023, and they're taking the aspirin for the headache in 2025. The governor has proposed a budget of $66 billion. That's based on the budget forecast and the deficit that's projected in 2 years. And so that's a $6 billion reduction overall. Now, K-12 takes up a chunk of the budget, probably the biggest chunk, and right behind is Health and Human Services. Together, those two items account for probably 60% of the state budget. And those aren't areas that we work in generally. But that's where the bulk of that $6 billion reduction is going to be. We're also probably going to feel it in the Ag Committee somewhat. The Ag chairs are telling us that they don't know how much money they're going to have to spend, but they do expect a reduction of some kind. So that's the outline on the budget. The final backgrounder on the budget has to do with the federal interaction that the state has on many fronts. We get funding from this federal government for just about every aspect of state government. So for example, I think 10% of our K-12 funding comes from the feds and a bunch of the food safety inspection. You guys know about USDA when we do depopulations and so forth. Those are federally funded activities. With the federal freeze that is underway here, the state government doesn't know what to expect while they're setting this budget. And so there's a little bit of a political component to that, but nevertheless, when you come here next week, you may hear about that. And as you're talking to members, the discussion about what about the USDA, how much do you rely on USDA and those kind of things could be relevant simply because the legislators are talking about the federal interaction. All right, now let's move on quickly to the structure of this building. We had our election in November and the Senate members were not up. So there was no change in the Senate in terms of the partisan count. The count in the Senate remains 34 Democrats, 33 Republicans. So there's a 1-vote margin by the Democrats. But I will say this year they have been much more bipartisan in that body already in the first 5 weeks. They have let the Republicans co-chair for a couple of weeks. They are hearing Republican bills. And the Senate, I have to give them credit, is really trying to do a bipartisan approach so far. Of course, that can fall off the rails as we get near the end. But for right now, the Senate is functioning very well. Over in the House, the results of the election changed the structure of the House. 2 years ago, the partisan count in the House was 70 to 64. 70 to 64. So the Democrats had a couple vote margin and they controlled the entire chamber. After the election, the House moved to a tie. It is now 67-67, with one small exception. There's a vacancy in the Roseville seat because the person who won in November doesn't actually live there. So when you folks come to town next week, the count in the House will actually be 67-66. It really is not a material difference for anything we're working on, but I just want you to know that for background. So that's the structure of the House. Right now, the Republicans chair the committees, but starting somewhere around March 15th, we expect that to go back to 67-67, in which case there will be co-chairs of the committees, one from each party. So that's the structure. That's the setting the table here for where we are right now on February 20th. If we can turn to the sheet, and Peter, I don't know if at this point if you screen share or what you want to do, but I will turn to the issue sheet now for discussion. Do you want me to just proceed, Peter?
Yes, you can, and I will pull that up.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
There you go.
Great, thank you. All right, we have 5 issues on this sheet. One of them is a policy matter. The rest deal with funding. And in talking with Ashley and Peter in setting this up, they felt that number 1 should be number 1, and I agree 100%. Let me explain number 1 here for you. The first issue we want to work on this year is making sure the Board of Animal Health and the Department of Ag Emergency Response Funds are fully funded. There is a lot of legislative support among both parties on this issue. And of course, the Commissioner of Ag and the board support this as well. One of the things that has happened is the Board of Animal Health may be a little bit short of funding for the last 3 months of this fiscal year, which will be April, May, and June of 2025. It's in the current budget cycle. The new one will start on July 1st, as I mentioned, but there may be a shortfall. And Ashley was at a seminar a few weeks ago, and the board indicated that testing may be one of the things they have to pinch pennies on. We don't know that for sure, but she did point that out. And so we want to make sure when you're down here that you tell the members you visit with about the importance of board animal health, about the testing, the surveillance, the depopulation activities that occur, and make sure that the board is fully funded, and make sure that this is not an area that's on the chopping block or getting a haircut when it comes to that tight budget. You'll see here the rationale why it matters. March 2025 marks the third consecutive years of high path. Some of you will remember the 2015 outbreak that spring was for a few months, and then it just kind of never showed up again. But this current one we've been on has not had a break even in the winter, even when it's been 20 below. You'll see here the staff hours, you'll see the overtime, and when there's overtime, that's not necessarily budgeted, and that's where some of this shortfall may show up. We also have the dairy cow testing going on for those herds. Again, that's an interaction with the feds, but nevertheless, that is a new activity the board has had to embark on here in the past few months. So message number one is make sure we fund the board. I'll tell you as a side note, in past years, there's been some efforts by legislators to tamper with the makeup of the board of animal health. We've had some new members added over the years, but there is no effort this year that we've seen or we expect to change the makeup of the board of animal health itself, which is kind of refreshing. So that's issue number one. Number two, Wild Bird Deterrent Grant Program. This around here is known as the Turkey Laser Program. It was coined by Senate Ag Committee Chair Eric Putnam when this first came. And this provides grant funding to help you all install lasers, lighting, sound systems, visual deterrents to try to keep the wild birds away from the farmyards, keep them away from the barns. We know the wild birds are spreading this stuff, and this is one way the state has tried to step forward and help get you those items on your farm. Last year was the first year we ran it. It was a little goofy because it was not in the budget year. It was in the off year. And so it really was a piece of supplemental funding. And this year we're taking a more serious run at it to try to beef it up from the get-go during the budget discussions. Senator Putnam has a bill at a place called the Revisor's Office. You'll see that's my last line here. I put that on here because if people ask you, legislators ask you, is there a bill? The answer is it's on the way. Senator Putnam has agreed to carry this in the Senate again for us. But the Revisor's Office is the place that officially writes it and codes them and gives it their format. And so we submitted the program to them, and now we're just simply waiting to have the Revisor's Office bring that bill back. And so once that gets back, we'll have a file number to work on, but right now we don't. And so that's what that means. Number three, related to number one, emergency response funding. There's an account inside the Department of Agriculture, it's a separate line item. It's called the Emergency Preparedness and Response Account. The Department of Ag uses that to respond to outbreaks, and it's not just avian flu. It would be African swine fever, TB in cattle, any of those kind of things. And last year, the department asked for an additional 1.5 million to beef that up. They got that. They were successful in that. And so this account will be funded again as part of the general Department of Ag conversation. There's a lot of pieces that make up the Department of Ag's funding sources, things they do, food safety, pesticide control, all that kind of stuff. And emergency response is one of those line items. So we haven't seen the department's detailed budget yet. It's not ready yet. But when that time comes, we want to make sure that the emergency preparedness and response account is fully funded and that they don't trim that or give it a 10% haircut. In fact, if they could put a little bit more in that, that would be a priority. The other protein groups are fully on board this. The pork producers certainly want this in case African swine fever breaks out. Again, we talked about the dairy cattle. Farm Bureau, Farmers Union, the two general farm organizations are also fully behind this. And so this is one of the messages that we want to make sure we convey. I might jump down to number 5, Peter's, just simply because we're on funding, and then go back to 4 because that's policy. Finish out the funding discussion. About 12 years ago, this outfit called the Agriculture Research, Education, Extension, and Technology Transfer Account became part of the Department of Ag. And the idea here was to have human capital at the U of M. Now, as a side note, it's kind of unfortunate that the U of M doesn't put this forward within their own budget. We have to go do this over in Ag. But nevertheless, this fund is about $21 million for a biennium, about 10 and a half each year. And this funds positions over at the U of M. And so all the ag groups support this in the ag budget as part of it, but ultimately this winds up over at the U of M for the most part. You'll see their targeted research on avian influenza, salmonella, and other things. Those are the results of the agreed fund with the human capital that is over at the U of M. We just had a hearing on this issue last week in the House and in the Senate. Those bills were laid over. You can see in the title, number 5, research. The Senate file is 1178. The House file is 653. Those were heard last week and laid over. There's support for this, but while you're in town, you want to reiterate with the members you're meeting with that the turkey industry and the chicken and egg side support those bills. And then last year, number 4 on your sheet, earned safe and sick time exemption. This goes back to 2023. And in 2023, in the first year of all DFL control, they did a lot of stuff for labor, a lot of stuff for workers, and this was one of them. This program is something that you do at your own farm or your company. This is not state involved like the unemployment insurance and those kind of things. This is something you have to keep track of. And basically, this program works as follows. Each employee you have gets to earn 1 hour of paid sick time for every 30 hours they work. Many places have this, but not all. And sort of the backstory on this one is during COVID, legislators would hear stories about people who work at Chipotle and places like that sneezing on the glass. And they said, well, I just simply can't afford to stay home and be sick. My employer doesn't pay me to be home. They just have me at home unpaid. And so the discussion got to be, well, let's make sure people can stay home during COVID. We don't want them running around during COVID. So we need to make sure that they have time off. That was kind of the origins of this. Anyway, when it went through in 2023, there were no small business exemptions. There were no farm exemptions. This was all employers and all employees everywhere in the state, including school districts and local governments and counties and all that. So last year, there was one farm exemption that was put in. A farm exemption was put in and passed last year that said, if you have seasonal workers who work less than 28 days on your farm, you don't have to keep track of their time and they are not subject to the safe and sick time law. And it was kind of to get the harvest people on the grain side of things, there's a lot of people who show up and drive grain carts and beet trucks and all that. And to keep track of 10 people for a few weeks out of the year was kind of a hassle. And so the Senate passed that. And they also passed a piece that said if you have 5 employees or less year round, you would also be exempt. Both of those passed the Minnesota Senate last year. They did not pass the House. When they got down to the final night of the session and they were cobbling everything together to shove it through and go home, the 28-day exemption survived, but the 5 or fewer did not. Now, of course, many of you on this call have year-round employees. You don't always have seasonal like the grain folks do. And so this would pick up members who have 5 or fewer employees. So if you have a hired man year-round, that would be picked up here. That has passed the Senate Jobs Committee, Labor Committee, and the Senate Ag Committee, and is currently on the Senate floor. There has not been any movement in the House yet. I expect there will be at some point. But that's what's going on in issue number 4, and that's something the poultry industry supports. You can see the House files there. Senate File 310 Dornick, and then House File 1057 is Paul Anderson. And so that's what's going on that issue. Peter, I don't know if you want to take questions, but I would close with the environment side. We are not seeing really much to talk about this year on the environment side, PCA, DNR, and so forth. We don't have any feedlot things going on. There's just nothing really happening there or in transportation really to speak of. So we focused our issues this year as of where we are on February 20th, and that is 4 funding issues and 1 policy. All right, those are my prepared remarks, and Peter, I'll let you take it from here as to what you want to do next. You want questions or what?
Absolutely. We can take questions now. If anyone has them, I do not see any in the panel right now in the question and answer panel. But feel free to raise your hand on the screen if you have a question. Give it a minute. We are not seeing any, so I will stop sharing my screen. So looks like you explained everything thoroughly, Bruce. Oh, Eminem has a hand raised, so I will let them talk. 1 second. Where'd you go? There you go. Allow talk. All right, you can now talk.
Is there any more being done for possible indemnity for the metapneumovirus? I know there was recently the zero interest loans, but at one point I thought there was some talk about indemnity on losses for pneumovirus. Is anything going anywhere on that still?
No, as far as indemnity for AMPV, no, there isn't really any movement on that at the federal level, just because it's not considered a federally reportable disease. It's been frustrating getting any additional support on that. So the low interest loans is kind of the baby steps, I guess, on getting some assistance. But I hear you. It'd be nice to have some kind of indemnification for that as well. But based on the status of the disease not being considered a federally reportable disease, they don't then offer the indemnification similar to high path.
Is there anything we can do at the Capitol Day, or that's not really anything for the state?
Well, good question. I think there's avenues there. We certainly have some conversations to have with our state legislature on funding a lot of disease response, including AMPV as well as high path, in lieu of the question marks that are out there with the federal government right now. So I think it's a conversation worth having. I think if you have the opportunity to have discussions about AMPV, it's worth mentioning that this is a disease that we don't get the same kind of financial support as high path. It's not as widely recognized, though it's as devastating to our turkey producers in Minnesota. I've certainly shared that message with both the Senate and House Ag committees. So it will be something they've heard before, and I think it's worth revisiting.
Okay.
And I will also note that Ashley will be testifying on Poultry at the Capitol to both the Senate and House Ag committees, and she will definitely be mentioning pneumovirus.
Okay.
And this is Bruce. That's a great point, Peter. We're going to have, I didn't mention this, will be on the schedule, but we have a hearing in the House Ag Committee at 1 and a hearing in the Senate Ag Committee at 3. And Ashley's message there will touch all the members at one time, and they'll be able to ask questions and they'll hear all the same answers. So maybe this question can be planted with one of the members so that we can have a discussion about it. But we do have that opportunity, and I did not mention that in my remarks.
Do we have any further questions for Bruce? Going once, going twice. All right. We will move on. Dr. Shauna Voss could not be with us today, and so she recruited the executive director of the Board of Animal Health, Dr. Brian Hoefs, to give us an update on the Board of Animal Health. So I will turn it over to you, Dr. Hoefs.
All right, thanks, Peter. Yes, second string, but I'll do my best to fill Shauna's shoes. And just give me a second. All right. Is that coming through okay, Peter?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right. As you can imagine, my updates are going to be mostly relevant to high-path avian influenza. So just to give you a rundown on where things are at in our current outbreak. So here's just a list of the cases we've had since mid-November. That's kind of the designation that we're sharing with you because we actually had declared Minnesota free from high path in middle of October. We enjoyed that status for a little over a month and then had our first positive commercial flock on the 25th of November, as you can see there. So we're allowed to maintain a disease-free status with the WOA non-poultry. So those are our backyard flocks. But when it enters into a commercial flock, then we're back into the status of being affected. I also want to point out those genotypes on the right-hand side. Those become important as we get into some of our discussions about where surveillance is going, especially when we start talking about other species. So as you recall, last summer, the genotype that we were dealing primarily with was the B31.3, and that was kind of nicknamed the dairy strain because that was the one that was detected in dairy cattle for the first time. Basically, all of our flocks that were affected over the summer and into the fall were affected with that genotype. Fast forward to this recent outbreak, and we're looking at the D variety primarily. There's that one genotype A3 at the top that was it's kind of related to this D 1.3, 1.1. But the point there is it's a new strain that is circulating. This is what's being seen in the migratory waterfowl, and it's what's being seen across the country, the D 1.1 strain. So just an update on where the totals are. So confirmed cases in Minnesota since 2022 is 185. 50 counties have been affected, and 9.1 million birds have been depopulated in that time. This is more of a national outlook. So what's happening in the last 30 days? As you can imagine, this map is already out of date. This is kind of the season for high path to be starting in a lot of our southern states. For some reason, our northern states were affected kind of throughout the winter as well. But primarily, the real hotbed has been California through the winter. They're dealing with that dairy strain, both in their dairy cattle and poultry flocks. But we're seeing some of our other states that are starting to show up with this D1.1 genotype that I mentioned in that previous slide. One state that isn't showing up here is Iowa, and I believe Iowa just had a detection here earlier this week. So just reemphasizing that it is in the Midwest as well. And the alarming thing with this that keeps me up at night is, this is our downtime. This is when we would assume that migratory waterfowl are not playing a significant role. We shouldn't be seeing cases. Typically, that starts more towards end of March when the migration begins. So the fact that this is circulating already is bothersome. The other thing I wanted to mention about this D1.1 strain, it's recently been detected in dairy cattle. So I had kind of hung my hat on the earlier dairy strain maybe had burned out in dairy cattle. We weren't going to see that around anymore, but there was a detection a couple weeks ago in Nevada in a dairy herd. And it was this same D1.1 strain that is circulating in waterfowl. Arizona also had a detection of D1.1 in a dairy herd this week. The further concern is this D1.1 strain has also been infecting people. So we've had a few cases, actually quite a few cases of kind of mild signs, mostly in people that are working with dairy cattle that are infected or poultry flocks that are being depopulated. They've developed mild cases of conjunctivitis, but we've had 2 or 3 cases of more critical patients with this. So Canada had a teenager that was actually hospitalized in critical condition with the D1.1 strain. Louisiana had a case of elderly individual that actually died with complications related to the D1.1 infection. And I believe I heard Wyoming had a individual that was being hospitalized for this as well. So the concern is this virus is learning to jump between species and to become more infectious towards humans. So more alarm that I have been expressing to our legislators, just that we can't rest on this being just a poultry disease anymore. It's learning how to infect other species. It's both a food safety risk when it comes to making sure we have enough food supply, but also now the idea that it can infect humans as well. Avian metapneumovirus is the other big virus that's been affecting our flocks in Minnesota, as you all are surely aware. So this continues to circulate in Minnesota, having significant impacts. This disease has been frustrating for a variety of reasons. The idea that there is no indemnification is not least among those. It's a reportable disease in Minnesota, so at the state level, not reportable at the national level. And what that means is basically there's no room or consideration for federal indemnification because of that. It's not considered a nationwide threat, even though we're seeing it in almost all of the states. For some reason, Minnesota is more affected than others, and obviously because of our extensive poultry population. The other frustrating thing about this disease is that it's the great mimicker and the great magnifier. So we're seeing a lot of flocks that are coming down with this virus, and it's allowing some of our more domestic diseases to kind of take hold and flourish and have more of a devastating effect. It also looks a lot like high-path avian influenza. Some of our flocks are being tested for high-path because it's assumed that that's what they have, and ends up being avian metapneumovirus. So I call it the great magnifier, the great mimicker. One point we want to make out here is make sure that you are paying attention to that mortality. So we do have concerns that we don't want to overlook a high-path infection just because it's potentially and likely avian metapneumovirus. So just a reminder, flocks who exceed the mortality threshold within their biosecurity plans must also rule out high-path. So if we have mortality spikes, we want to make sure that you are contacting Dr. Voss and arranging things with the diagnostic lab or MPTL to get those tested to rule out the presence of high-path avian influenza. Bruce, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to ask a question about AMPV? Or hold it till the end. Oh, there you go.
That was a mistake, Doctor. I don't know how that even happened.
Oh.
So I lowered it.
All right.
Okay.
All right, Rural Finance Authority. So this is a recent change that we were able to get through. Commissioner Peterson with Department of Ag and myself worked on getting avian metapneumovirus recognized as an emergency disease in the state so that the Rural Finance Authority can offer some zero interest loans for farmers that are affected by this. So this is eligibility for AMPV as well as high-path and H5N1 viruses. So this is for producers of poultry as well as producers of dairy and the commodities that are being affected by these diseases. So if there's decrease in production, if there's flocks that are being destroyed and need for funding to get back on your feet again, that's what this Rural Finance Authority is about. That's where the low interest, zero interest loans are being made available. That wasn't a case until recently. So Commissioner Peterson made a valiant attempt and succeeded on getting that approved through RFA. That QR code on the side is there to bring you to their website, so you can see the application process and get things rolling if you feel you're affected by one of these diseases and could use some assistance. Updates for indemnification for HiPath. We've got a new requirement for audits on poultry farm biosecurity audits. So restocking audits have always been there, where farms, sites that had detection have to go through a biosecurity audit before restocking to be eligible for indemnity. A new rule came out at the end of the year that would also include buffer zone placements to undergo buffer zone audits. So this is a new type of audit, a biosecurity audit. It's much more in depth than our NPIP audits that you maybe are used to. This one's been a little bit frustrating for producers as well as for our staff. So this is one of those late breaking rules that came out kind of without a lot of notice and without a lot of direction. The audits are to be done by either USDA or Board of Animal Health staff. Unfortunately, they didn't have any training at the time that it was first rolled out. So we have had some training offered recently. We had, I think I've got it up here. Yeah. We had 10 individuals from Minnesota between our local USDA officials and Board of Animal Health staff that were able to take the biosecurity audit training. So we are now able to conduct those audits when we have buffer zone placements that are looking for that to be approved, so that they can be indemnified if they would happen to be infected later on. So more information about that. I think that's what my next slide here is. Yeah, there's a QR code that will take you to a website to give you a little more information about that. We're trying to come up with a guidance document also to have available on our website, so producers can kind of get an idea of what the enhanced biosecurity audit is going to look like and what provisions are needed. But strong recommendation for everyone to evaluate what you have for biosecurity plans now. Make sure that you are including those new items that are going to be listed in the buffer zone or the biosecurity compliance audit program. So again, check that QR code or the website that is provided there. And this one is another change that came out. So this is enhanced surveillance of turkey flocks in HiPath affected states. So this is a pilot program, is what they're calling it. It's not a rule. It's a policy. So I guess the gist behind this one is that poultry flocks in South Dakota and Minnesota are required to do HiPath avian influenza PCR testing within 72 hours of slaughter. There's a lot of unknowns with this. This was a policy that kind of rolled out middle of January. You've maybe heard about this. You've maybe seen some media reports on this. Officially, USDA is saying it's due to the amount of indemnity that's been paid out in flocks in Minnesota and South Dakota. That's why those two states were identified as the states that would have this higher scrutiny on their poultry or turkey specifically going to slaughter. Minnesota has had the highest number of turkey flocks that have been infected and indemnified for HiPath avian influenza. South Dakota boasts the most repeat infections, so that's why they got lumped into this. Aside from that, there's also been some concern, some detections of this H5N1 virus in cats, both domestic cats and large cats in wild cat sanctuaries. So earlier this winter, there were some detections of H5N1 in those cats, domestic and wild cats. And they end up tracing back to some strains that were very similar to strains we had here in Minnesota. So the genomics that we use for this virus now are pretty sophisticated. It's basically a fingerprint and family tree for how this virus is spreading. And there has been there's some close relation to a virus that was originally found in Minnesota last summer. So a lot of questions, more questions than answers really on how that happened. These cats were being fed raw food, either the commercial raw pet food diets to the domestic cats, or just raw meat that was being fed to some of the big cats. The timing was right around Thanksgiving, so a lot of it was discarded or outdated Thanksgiving turkeys that food shelves had donated to these organizations. But for whatever reason, the virus that they detected in these cats was very closely related to the strain that we found in Minnesota last summer. So that is the rest of the impetus behind this. The suggestion that perhaps we're missing some cases of this virus, and it's getting into processed food. Excuse me. I think anecdotally we've heard reports that the virus acted different. This B3.1 or B3.1.3, it just acted different. The birds didn't get sick maybe as quickly. So that's, I think, what this is about, the increased testing. All that being said, there's not a lot of information on how this is going to roll out. This isn't something that is being left to the Board of Animal Health to manage. It's a USDA initiative, so USDA will be managing it, but we haven't heard what a start date will look like, what the processing will look like, how we'll get those tests in within a 72-hour period, knowing that we have sites that are not within 72 hours of a lab, or weekend processing. So there's a lot of what ifs. I did get a chance to talk to Dr. Sifford with the USDA about this and express concerns about the constraints. And she reminded me that it's a policy, not a rule. So that gives us some flexibility on how it's implemented. So I think there will be some tweaks to this particular rule, this policy. So more to come on that. Again, it's not something that's being handed down through the Board of Animal Health, but we certainly are interested in what the USDA is planning and how we end up being partnered into that. QR code again, just to get more information from the USDA on what this looks like. And then this is my last slide, just to remind you of the MPTL VDL testing schedule. So avian influenza samples must be to MPTL by 11 in the morning, Monday through Friday, to have same-day testing. Avian metapneumovirus testing occurs 8 o'clock Monday through Friday. So all samples received the day before will be tested. And then, excuse me, all sick bird testing must be coordinated through the Board of Animal Health. And I believe that's my last slide. Happy to take any questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Hoefs. Do we have any questions? We will also be seeing you at Poultry Day at the Capitol, I believe, Dr. Hoefs. You're coming to the Lady Slipper room to meet with us?
Yes, I am. And I'm also testifying at the House based on some of the poultry diseases that we just discussed. So yes, I will be there all day.
Okay, excellent. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions for you, so we'll be able to end this webinar a little bit early. I appreciate everyone participating. Like I said, this was recorded and will be available on our website. I will also add, we will not be having a webinar in March, simply because we are doing regional meetings, both in Willmar and in Bertram, Minnesota, talking about avian metapneumovirus, talking about the vaccines. We have representatives from Vaccinova and Zoetis coming to discuss their vaccines. So if you have not yet registered for those events, I encourage you to please do so. That helps us make sure we have enough food ordered. And I appreciate everyone's time today, and I am going to sign off. Thank you.